in line, so you know you're set before you head it somewhere internationally. So we'll talk about choosing a location for an international ski trip, some stuff about length of trip and timing of your trips, some things on group dynamics and interest, international considerations, self-run versus hiring a guide, the importance of flexibility, and then that's about half the presentation. The other half is examples on mostly things that went wrong on trips of mine so that you can hopefully learn from my mistakes. So yeah, let's get into it here. So when I'm planning an international ski trip, there's a couple different ways to think about it, in my opinion. You can think about skiing in one location. So like you want to go do a trip to Japan, or you want to go do a trip to Antarctica, or you can think about it that you want to do a trip at a certain time. So let's say as it's wrapping up here in Ogden sometime in April, you have some availability, April 9th through the 18th. Maybe you can drive to Canada, right? You could go to Revelstoke, you could go to Whistler, or you could go to Alaska, and you can have options during that time frame that you have. So just something to consider. I like to have that flexibility because I've been hosed on conditions more than once. So when you're getting ready to plan a trip, you should identify your specific goals. So with the team that you are interested in doing a trip with, let's say you want to do the Bugs to Rogers Traverse, or you want to ski this volcano that's in the background that's called Mount Yote in Japan. It helps to know what your goals are so that you can, set a time frame. Like if you go to Japan in January or the beginning part of February, you're very unlikely to be able to get up there because that's just not the time frame to do that trip. So, and then length of trip. So my opinion is when you're doing adventure trips like this, traveling, dealing with jet lag and all that stuff, you get there. Maybe you're going to have a couple great days and sunny days. Maybe you're going to have a couple really snowy days, some windy days. It allows you to have some flexibility to have a longer trip. So typically when I'm doing a trip, I try to have like about 8 ski days, a little bit less. Like you can obviously do a trip that's 4 or 5 days long, but maybe you're not going to get the best conditions or the conditions that you had hoped for. Or be able to attain your objective. So having a little bit longer trip is what I would suggest if you're, about 8 days. Want to throw in a little bit on, like as you're getting ready to book things. I don't know. I guess show of hands real quick. Who's done an international ski trip? Okay, fair number in here. Okay, awesome. Just helpful to know the audience. So if you want to do a trip, let's just throw out some random dates again. April 16th through the 23rd, and you want to go to Japan, great, book that flight. You're going to go to Japan regardless. But the other way to think about things that I want to throw to you guys, and I'm not going to be a used carpet salesman about it or anything like that, but is the importance of miles. The flexibility that you get when you're booking flights on miles. You can cancel up to the last minute, have maybe multiple trips. If you have, you could have a flight booked to, one location and another one, and then be able to cancel it. There's a lot of things that you get. I'm not going to talk to you about that. Too much. Pay your credit card on time, but as long as you do that, rack up those miles because they are so valuable. My friends are probably groaning in the audience that like, hey, get this credit card so that you can do this trip with me. The other way to think about it too, just to talk about my wife really quick, for our honeymoon, we chose a random location in Namibia, and those flights were very expensive. It was maybe $25,000 or $3,000, but we were able to do it with miles to make it way cheaper. And so anyways, just consider that when you're booking your trip. You get a lot more flexibility if you have those miles stashed away as far as just being able to cancel and change and that sort of thing. So how you're going to get around on your trip. Maybe you don't need a rental car. Great. But if you do need a rental car, now that you've purchased a flight, you can get that set up. things to think about as far as that is concerned is, you know, a lot of us in the States, manuals aren't as common. Can you drive manual? Can you drive automatic? I got hosed by that a few times. You know, I learned on some of those rental cars, but you can select automatic. If you get to the rental car desk and you didn't choose, they're going to give you a manual more than likely. So just something to be aware of. Also booking stuff like tire chains if you need to in advance. Important things to do so that you can get around when you're traveling and not deal with closures and stuff like that. Kind of along the lines of, you know, purchasing airfare is just refundable reservations. That's like my MO is I'm just constantly booking and recognizing like when I'm locked into a trip and when I still have flexibility. So, you know, I can continue maybe looking for cheaper flights or other options. You know, we're all probably familiar with that aspect, but just throwing it out there, how valuable that is to give you flexibility on your trip. Know when you are locked into your trip and when you can still be flexible. If you're getting ready to head out, have somebody in the group that is providing a gear list. So that way everybody shows up with the proper gear to run the trip. And then also with that, consider like your in-country resources. So I'll go into some examples later, but you know, if you do trips in certain places, you know, whatever, those resources may not be the same as you getting hurt in America or getting hurt in Europe. I'll never forget a friend of mine got hurt in Europe and they said, I'm sorry, it's going to be a long delay. And they had a helicopter for him in like 30 minutes. That's a long evac for them. A lot of the areas that I ski, that's not necessarily the case. And so you want to be a little bit more self-sufficient. And then, you know, if you're getting ready to do a trip, do you need a prep course, skills refresher? You know, should you do crevasse rescue? Should you refresh those beacon skills? You know, obviously throwing it out there that before you do any trip, you know, just pull out the beacon and make sure you practice up. It's just a good way to, you know, get your group dynamics going and make sure everybody's well prepared for the trip. Next thing I like to think about is just the split of like what I want out of the trip. So am I trying to just go exclusively backcountry skiing? Do I just want to exclusively ski the resort? Or do I want to do some sort of mixed trip where it's dumping snow, I want to ski at the resort, and now it's Bluebird, and it's tracked up at the resort. Now I want to have that ability to go into the backcountry and get away from everybody and you know, have that sort of experience. So I'm saying this because if you don't have these conversations with your group beforehand and it comes up on the trip, you know, you may have just big disagreements within the group. So definitely think about it beforehand. Along with that is your avalanche training and uphill abilities. So I have done enough guiding to, you know, Denali is a good example. I used to do some high altitude guiding where we're guiding group trips. And I like to say that it's like taking 6 dice and rolling them. You might get some 6s and you might get some 1s. And, you know, you're trying to make a group work like that. You know, somebody from Dubai that's never experienced negative 40-degree temperatures, you know, that's just not a recipe for success. So with that, I would highly suggest you do trips around with people beforehand. Make sure that your trip is not, you know, the first time you're skiing with somebody internationally. Don't just accept somebody to your group because they can pay what it takes to get in your group. Make sure that they're the right fit for your group. And then the other thing I like to think about is the skiing to cultural balance. You know, is everybody there for just the skiing? Like they want to ski 10,000 vert of uphill every day? Or are they excited to see some of the cultural things that a place has to offer? You know, what's your metrics of success is another way to think about it. Like when I'm going to some of these destinations, my metric, if you keep it super low, you're always going to be happy. So like throwing skis on my feet, making a few turns, you know, it's only uphill from there. So let's talk about international considerations. So when you're headed to more remote places, you need to think about where your nearest medical care is. And I'm sorry if I sound like a guide or a risk manager too much. I did take a risk management course this last spring, but this is really important things that, again, when I start going through examples, you'll see why. You should always be aware of where your nearest medical care is. So Greenland, there was basically nothing there for us at all. It was flying back to Iceland, except for a very small local clinic. So not a place you really want to get injured. You should also think about your travel and rescue insurance. Is that something you have? Is that something maybe some guy talked you into a credit card that comes with rescue insurance? I can't really talk too heavily about that. There used to be a good credit card called the Chase Sapphire Reserve that would come with a lot of those benefits, and it's still good, but it's like $750 now. So that's, but anyways, does your credit card come with those benefits, or is it something that you should purchase separately to make sure that if you break your leg or something happens to you, not only can you get the medical care without a huge bill, although that's not as much of a problem, in some other places, but that you can maybe also get repatriated back to your own country. They can put you on a flight, get you back here. Those are all things, I think about when I'm doing my trip. So another shout out to the American Alpine Club. You can sign up for the American Alpine Club. I'm not sure what it is right now, maybe $100 a year. And you get a little bit, maybe $10 or $15, $20,000 of helicopter rescue insurance. So honestly, it's something that's just on auto pay for me. The benefits of having that are nice to have, but you should also be aware of some of the requirements that go along with it. If you're doing an international trip, you should be aware of your cell phone plan and if it's going to work. Back a few years ago, my wife here had AT&T, and I know every time she turned her phone on in country, it was $15 a day. So I've worked a lot internationally. I ended up switching my cell phone to Google Fi, and I could just turn my cell phone on in like 150 different countries, and it just works right away. So that's a nice thing to have, but that's still not every country. And so along those lines, a little bit of a nuance, but the eSIM is so big now. And in this place that we did our honeymoon, eSIM wasn't an option. They still had a physical SIM card. So make sure if you're going to a place like India, for example, that like we pulled a phone out of retirement so that we had the ability to have a cell phone that worked properly there, call for rescue, whatever. You should also think about when issues happen if you don't have cell service, especially if it's a country where you can't speak the language. I would highly suggest downloading Google Translate, making sure it's available offline. So that way, you get into an accident with somebody in Japan, you can at least use Google Translate to apologize profusely and then, figure the rest of the steps out and move on versus just being, in a poor predicament if you're unable to speak the language. And then another thing to consider is, should you have a satellite device, something like a Garmin InReach for calling for rescue? Or is that illegal in the country you're headed to? For example, India, you can't have satellite devices, no InReaches, no satellite phones. So be aware of the local requirements, restrictions, anything like that. Okay, should you do a guided or unguided trip? That one's a little bit hard for me to, tell you a certain opinion on, but one way to think about it is to just pay for a day or two when you arrive to a place that you're unfamiliar with. Pay somebody local to Kyrgyzstan or India or Ecuador, get a feel for what the conditions are. Are you in a melt freeze cycle, or are you dealing with a deep persistent slab? Hire them for a couple days, and now you can do your own trip and have, some local connections that can help you, and it just sets you off on the right foot. Amongst the group, you should also consider what your avalanche training is, how your rescue skills are, and then your navigational skills. Like, if you put that all together, are you able to put the avalanche forecast that exists in a lot of these countries onto the terrain in a random area that you're just showing up to? Just some considerations when you're deciding which route to go. So in advance of a trip for me, this is an example of something my wife did before we headed to Svalbard. So we like to know all of the options, all the places that we can ski, whether that be out of a guidebook, doing research online, local friends, whatever. We've got a map of all the places we can go ski. Now we fly into the country, we can get a feel for what the conditions are. Now we know what our options are. We're not really figuring out where to ski as much as like which option we should ski. So just a little plug for CalTopo and those mapping softwares. I'm sure everybody has their own preference, but yeah, it sets you up for success. So you're less figuring that out on the fly, and you're prepared when you arrive to just hit the ground running. The importance of flexibility. And I think we've all probably done a ski trip or a trip where it hasn't quite worked out in our favor. You may say that you want to go to, for a domestic example, the Pacific Northwest in June or July and ski the volcanoes. That's a great trip. And maybe it rains, pours, or snows on you. Having that operational flexibility. You expected corn snow, now you're skiing powder instead. How are you going to change that trip? Maybe you're unable to go to the high peaks now. You need to be like lower down in the trees to have visibility. Things to think about. What other alternative options are there in the area? Again, I said this before, but cultural, historical things, those are a great way. If you have just a bad weather day and you have a list of things you're interested in checking out in the country that you're visiting, boom, that sucks. It's a bad weather day, but you've got some interesting things and you're not figuring that out when you're there. You've got kind of some agreement within your group of what you're interested in doing. And then I already talked about know when you become locked in. That's like a kind of flexibility thing. If you're doing a bunch of reservations, I have had that happen before. Like, you need to be a little bit careful to make sure that, the time frame didn't pass and now you're locked in on a trip that you intended to cancel. So I use calendar or some on my computer here to make sure that's all in alignment after one mistake. And then on trip consideration. So you just flew to an area, you just got to Chile, wherever, and now your bag's lost. This just happened to me, so that's why I'm talking about it. You should think about what you're carrying with you in carry-on. And so I always, hopefully everybody here knows this, maybe I'm telling it, everybody thinks but carry your ski boots on. Those are the hardest things to get when you're in a foreign country. You can usually get set up with everything else, but if you don't fly with your ski boots, that can be a really hard thing to get on the fly. So I showed up in Santiago, Chile in July of last year. My bag didn't show up. I went to the counter and she said, I'm sorry, sir, your bag's in Rome. And she goes, this happens all the time. I just, give that look of how does this happen all the time? Why is my bag on the wrong continent? And now, how are you going to help me out here? And that was a bit of a nerve-wracking process, sort of sifting through all the internet information on what they're going to do for you and what you can do. And I never really got an answer. I ended up going to the Patagonia store and North Face, outfitted myself, $1,000, got back from my trip and put in my receipts, and they refunded me within 2 hours of submitting it. So that was a really good experience, and I'm just passing that along because I was on Reddit trying to figure everything out. I was there for guiding, and I don't have my kit. So rental car issues. This one's, again, a little bit nuanced, but I showed up in Chile and they tried to give me socks for my car. And we actually took them and said, that's fine. and got stuck driving up one of the roads to go to the volcano. So make sure you're reserving tire chains. You're explicit that, you want tire chains. And if you can't get them nowadays, I just have a budget for myself to buy tire chains that I just give them when I leave, because it's not something that I can fly with. I just take my car to a place, they fit it my car, and then I just consider it a donation when I'm done. So that way I know I have, the equipment to get me around. Maybe everybody's familiar too, but like what weather and avalanche resources you have. A lot of these places that you can travel to nowadays do have local avalanche forecasts. So whether that be Japan, even Gulmarg, India, places like that have avalanche forecasts. And if you go to other places, maybe the Arctic or Ecuador, or I don't know, there's too many places out there to name, you may have to do all of your own avalanche forecasting. So do that research in advance of the trip to make sure that you know what those resources are. You're sort of following the snowpack maybe a month or two beforehand. I mean, these trips aren't something we get to do all the time. Builds the excitement up, and you can follow that snowpack before you get there, so you're aware whether it's a stable snowpack or is dealing with like deep slab instability. So, and then once you're on the ground, where you should specifically go. So I did show that map earlier. That's one way to do it. Another way is getting local guidebooks, and this is just a quick plug. If you're someone like me who loves having lots of resources around that you can thumb through, it's this website called backcountrybooks.co, and they've got all the international books, almost all the guidebooks you could want. And once in a while, it's like buy a couple books, and I hope to one day have the whole library, because they've got so many awesome resources there. And then just throwing it in there that you should really bring cash. Carry that everywhere you go on these international trips. My friends and I were in Argentina last year, and I'll get to that in a second too. We had really poor conditions, and we had to pivot. We paid a backcountry operation that had some geodesic domes, and they wanted to be paid in cash. And we're in Argentina. It was a very tough thing. I was very lucky that they had a U.S. bank account that I could send them money to. That's something bigger than we'll get into here. But I will tell you that I dealt with the fraud department for about 45 minutes because they thought it was associated with some crypto scam. I don't know. And if you just bring cash with you, that's the best way to go. Just to make sure, and don't spend it all while you're there. Make sure you have some extra, so that way if something happens when you're on your way to the airport, you can take care of yourself, and U.S. dollars are valuable there. So that's my preparing for trips part of the presentation. Now I'm going to go into many of the things that have happened to me. Consider this, well, it's not quite like accidents in North American mountaineering by any means, but learn from my mistakes so they don't happen to you. It's also a little bit about some of the hazards that you can encounter that are so different from anything we experience here. So the first one is to go back on this photo here. This is a ferry ride from the main island of Hokkaido that takes you to the island of Roosters. So when I was working there, I was lucky enough to get a few days off, and we took our rental car up there. We got right to the border of Japan and Russia. The signs are in Russian and Japanese. They had pierogies and all that stuff going on. It was really cool culturally. And we're on the ferry ride. I mean, that mountain looks awesome, doesn't it? Yes. Okay. Well, when we got there, the route that I had planned looked like this. There was no trailheads around on the other side, no places to park a car. This is the route that we had planned to climb. There were raised boot tracks from previous people and raised ski tracks that we were skiing around. We made the best of it. We did put our skis on and make some turns, but that one didn't turn out we weren't able to summit. We were skiing around folded over bushes that were frozen into the snow. And it just, it didn't go super well, but it was still fun. And that's what's important. At the beginning of my intro, I told you I worked for Hokkaido Backcountry Club. I worked there 4 years. 3 of those years, I was one of the head guides there. Japan is such a hot commodity right now. I just wanted to go into some specifics about what I've experienced there to pass along for the group, because it's not exactly what people expect before they head there for the first time. So the Japanese mentality is more or less that the piste is for skiing, the roads are for driving, not for skiing. They're very, particular in that way. The backcountry is less common. Obviously, it is exploding to a certain degree, but it's less common for them. And that really takes effect when you talk about the rescue. And so in 4 seasons of working there, I had 3, relatively serious injuries that required me to either call for a helicopter or use the rescue sled that I carry in my backpack. A couple tib-fib to the boot top from buried branches, and then one person unassociated with our group that had skied off the other side of a resort, snowboarded into a tree and broke his femur. And ironically, if you will, this person was an Australian whose job was to help injured Australians in Japan. He spoke fluent Japanese, and he was the person that got injured. There was no cell service at all there. It's the backcountry. And I was lucky enough that I had my work radio, and I could call somebody that was on a ridge line that had access to, our head department that could call a helicopter in for this person that has a broken femur. That would have been a lot harder without having that figured out. And so another plug to have something other than just a cell phone. Don't expect a fast rescue. I don't know how this one will go over, but I got to throw it out there. Consider having and carrying and learning how to use a rescue sled. I'm not sure how familiar, the whole group is, with the guiding industry and stuff, but it's fairly common to carry a breakdown rescue sled in your backpack. And that can get you out of a lot of circumstances, with having somebody that gets injured out there. You can package them up and start dragging them out while rescue's mobilizing, or maybe you can't even get in touch with them. You have to send somebody to the ridge line to get in touch. Throwing it out there as a really good thing to consider having. And then know how to call for help in the areas you're traveling. So obviously in the US, like 911, some places it's 119. What are you calling to? Who are you asking for help? Is it a radio channel that you should be on? You should have a VHF radio, or you should be familiar with the zone that you're traveling to. This photo here is of the creek holes that are in Japan. Anybody that's been there knows there's a lot of water, but there's also a lot of warm water. And so with those onsens and hot springs that are running through, it's fairly common. And so if you look down here, that's a person's head that's stuck in a hole. And so as a guide in Japan, we always carry a 100-foot rope, as well as, some webbing, carabiners, stuff like that, to be able to haul somebody out if they fall into a hole like that. So here's your rescue sled, pretty simple. They used to be a little bit more complicated where they required your skis. Those sleds, in my opinion, from using them on a rescue, had some issues. Now you just have sleds where you just wrap somebody up and, all encompass, tie them up like that. You can drag them down the slope. It's nice on a hill. It's not very nice when you get to flat ground and you have to haul them out through, whatever, a foot or two of fresh snow that's on the ground. But, I'd be remiss if I didn't at least mention that as something to be considered if you're doing trying to do like adventure ski trips. And then on the right, I know we don't have glaciers and crevasses here, but if you're headed to a glaciated area, being familiar with your crevasse rescue, you don't want just like one experienced person in your group to have those crevasse rescue skills, because the inevitable thing is they're the person that falls in the crevasse. Everybody in the group or a majority of people should have those skills to have that spread out amongst the group in case anything happens. Some of these are a little bit random, but enjoy. This was a trip to Chile that we did where we were skiing all the volcanoes. We skied Osorno, Villarrica, Lone Quimay, a bunch of them. And we got here. This was the crown jewel of the trip. This one's called Lanin. And we got there. We arrived to the trailhead. And I don't think it's quite clear enough. So this basically says, it's a brand new sign. There's no scrapes on it, nothing. It was just put there. And it says, Lanin is not permitted to climb because there's no established route. And that's all we had. We had no cell phone service, no nothing. I didn't want to get thrown in a Chilean jail. The climb that we had planned around doing was closed. We didn't have any reason. We had to make a pivot. And so, again, having those backups that you're aware of, what you can do, it's very, very helpful so that you can just flow right into the next backup plan. Jumping around a little bit, this is back to Japan. So along with the warm water also comes warm earth. And so many of you may be familiar with, glide avalanches on rock slabs, whether it be down in the Wasatch or over here. In Japan, you can get them everywhere. So this is Shirobetsu, where we used to do heli skiing. And once it warms up a little bit in the spring, and even before it warms up, you'll start to get these just gaping crevasses, basically. They're very, very similar to crevasses, but they do come with a little bit of avalanche hazard as well, or they come with avalanche hazard as well. Things to be aware of: if you're skiing down, you have a blind rollover, you're not in glaciated terrain, but boom, there's just a 5 or 10 meter gap to where the snow is on the other side. And so just throwing it out there that a couple ironic things happened. Actually, that's not the word. As I was preparing for this presentation, I got a text just last week from, I helped my wife's friend get ready for a trip to Japan. And I, talked about some of these things, and I got a text that, and some of this info may not be 100% accurate, but it's a text that somebody had fallen in a glide crack, needed help, and rescue was 1 day away for them. This is last week. I was working out on Monument, and I was out of service. And when I got back to service, I texted him back and said, hey, I didn't work in that zone, but I'm sure I can ask Hokkaido Backcountry Club to reach out. If anything, I can try to help. And she said it was all good. Like there was rescue on the way, but that person fell far enough into a glide crack that people were able to access them, but they couldn't get them out. And sadly, that person passed away. For those of you that maybe heard that on unofficial networks or wherever. But just being, aware, you have to know what your hazards are. If you head to a zone and you're not aware that that's even a thing, it's not setting you up for success. It just allows things to sneak up on you that can injure you or kill you that you're not even aware are a thing. So this is another photo of a glide crack. They're very common in Japan. This is one that's covered over, just like a crevasse would be for those of us that ski in glaciated terrain. I just like that. Just, you can tell it's low density snow. You step there, you're going to fall right in. So those are some of the Japan nuances. Now I want to talk about a trip I did to Kyrgyzstan to climb Peak Lenin. Most of these are ski trips, but this one was a climbing trip. And I showed up in Bishkek, which is the capital of Kyrgyzstan, to fly to a domestic flight to the town of Osh. And I'm really glad I took this photo now. I did get yelled at for it. I learned that that's not something you're supposed to do. We got on the flight, and it was just like, it was a rattly flight. That's all I can say about it. It was one of those flights where you land and everybody starts clapping. I was not in a good headspace at all. That's all I can say there. We headed up and we climbed Peak Lenin. It was awesome. We had a great time, minus some really severe thunderstorms. I can't go into everything. But when we got back to the airport, and I was working for a guide service at this time, when we got back to the airport, we're checking in for our flights to fly back to the capital. Our flights out internationally are the next day. At the ticket counter, they said, "I'm sorry, the flight's full. We don't have space for you." And we don't have space for you all day. The next time that you can fly out is tomorrow. And so we're like, well, our international flight back home is tomorrow. What are we going to do? Well, we found a taxi at the airport, and we had to do a road trip for about 14 hours all across Kyrgyzstan to make it to our international flight. It was a little bit of a rush for us. I think we got there at 2 a.m. and stopping for every single call to prayer as we were rushing to get to our flight didn't help things. But luckily, I didn't have this planned by any means, but we were able to make it work, make our international flight. And, I didn't have to get on that airplane again. So that brings that story. I was actually happy while I'm in the car. Oh, this is great. Let's see. I think the year after I did a trip to India, and this is to Gulmarg, India. It's quite high altitude there. It's about 14,000 feet. So it's pretty common to take the gondola up to the top so that you can acclimatize, ski one run. If you keep skiing up there all day, you're going to start feeling like garbage. Just to expose yourself to the altitude and come back down. And so I did that. And then I headed up the next day, and I did what you're not supposed to do at the beginning of my presentation. I met some random people and I sussed them out. And while I was talking with them, they told me that the day beforehand, they had watched a snow leopard walk across this slope. These are not boot packs by people. That's a snow leopard that was there. And so I was aware that they existed there. I had done the research. They're basically the most docile big cat that there is. But also in the, prepping for this talk, for those of you that heard, somebody got attacked by a snow leopard like 4 days ago in China. I can't really hold that against what I learned in advance of this trip, because they walked up to the snow leopard to get a selfie. So anyways, they're very generally docile, but you should be aware of what is around that can impact your trip. There's a very famous video of people skiing the lower trees of this zone called Babarishi trees, of somebody skiing into a snow leopard, not like hitting them, but they saw the snow leopard, it bounces around. They didn't go up and get a selfie, and it just bounded off. So I went to ski that slope, and I skied it before. I should move this. I skied it before. This is like the mountain of Gulmarg, but if you turn around, there's a beautiful hill below homes that you can go skiing on. I had hired a guide because I like to create international relationships. If I bring a group there, I know that there's a guide that I can work with for a future trip, but he didn't want to get up that early. And so I skied that slope where somebody would run into a snow leopard, and I was aware. Threw my skins back on, skinned up to the top. It was now light out, and there's a pack of a very large pack of dogs that is not happy with my presence there. And all I can say is I'm lucky that the snow was super deep and I'm able to kind of run and jog fast enough and articulate my ski pole in that swooshing motion to fend them off. But again, that was not a hazard that I was anticipating. I was worried about the snow leopard. I was blind to the domesticated dogs that didn't want me there. So this was, let's see, this was 2019. So that trip was in February into March. I get back to the United States, and the company I work for called Mountain Madness, they said, hey, you were just in Kashmir. Do you want to go back? And I jumped on it and I said, absolutely, I want to go back. And so they had set up a trip to climb Noon Peak in India. And we flew there on August 3rd, I believe. Why that matters is that as we're doing gear checks in New Delhi, India had decided that Kashmir was a part of India. And they had immediately put into effect that groups larger than 4 were not allowed to conglomerate. They had shut off all cell phone service, and they didn't want any dissent, because at least when I did a trip there, there's a lot of animosity. You're in India, if you will, or a disputed area, but they're rooting for the Pakistani soccer teams. They wanted to be a part of Pakistan. And so we're in New Delhi doing gear checks with a full group of climbers, and we can't go to the zone that we had planned on. And so the only option is to go to the Indian Mountaineering Federation and kind of run through their list of permits. And boy, do they have a lot of restrictions. They wouldn't make any exceptions for us. We could only choose things that they could permit on the spot. Many higher peaks, like the peak we were supposed to climb was 7,000 meters. We weren't able to get anywhere close to that, but we were able to find a 6,000 meter peak that they could approve us for on the spot. We thought we did due diligence well to know sort of the monsoon timing, because the area we were supposed to go to is a much later monsoon. We considered that. We found this peak. We came up with 2 options for our group, and we said, do you want to activate your travel insurance? Do you want to go climb this peak, or do you want to go climb that peak? And everybody decided that they wanted to stay with us and do this peak. And so we headed off on a 3-day bus ride to get to this peak. It was terrible. We get up there and we're establishing camps higher and higher on the mountain. And we get to camp 2, feeling good. We've got our supplies up there. Head back to base camp. Common thing to spend a night or 2 there before you head up onto the upper mountain to stay there for your summit push. And a huge storm hits. It's basically the monsoon. And it is dumping snow, and our jobs as guides are to make sure that your equipment's in good condition and everything, and ours was. But the crew of people that we recruited at the last minute to carry our supplies to this area, all of their tents collapsed. So, our only option was to put our tail between our legs, break camp, and go back down to town. And so we hike back down to town, and we get to the town's called Urgos. I'll never forget it. And we learned that the snows that fell on us, 2, 3, whatever feet it was torrential rains, and hundreds of landslides had covered the roads that we drove on for 3 days to get there. So this is the road that we had driven on. We hung out in this village for a couple days, a few days maybe. I can't actually quite remember. I blocked that from my brain, because the only food, and if anybody listening from online did this trip with me, the only food that this town had was cauliflower. So we ate cauliflower for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And to this day, when I do trips or when I'm guiding anybody that was on that trip, cauliflower is on their do not serve that to me list, because we're stuck in this town. they weren't planning to serve us. And yeah, they need to, anyways, we had to eat cauliflower. We were able to get everybody out of there, but I would estimate like a reasonable guess is somewhere between 300 and 500 landslides had buried those roads that we traveled on. So this is, more or less one for, it's standard fare. I went to Iceland a couple of years ago and showed up to basically one of the worst winters that was ever there. I think it was the lowest season they had in 2022 or 2023, whatever year we were there. And my only thing to say about this is you might get there, be looking at, oh man, I just flew halfway around the world to go skiing here. But, you might have to travel halfway around the world to just barely scrape by a run. But if you're able to find the one line that connects, that can make the trip. And so it wasn't what any of us expected, but we were able to get some skiing in. So even when you head on a trip, you hear that it's the worst conditions of all time. Maybe you didn't book the flexible trip and you can pivot to somewhere else. You can usually make the best of it if you've got all that stuff planned in advance. Jumping around a little bit, but just going into some hazards that you can encounter out there. So traveling in Greenland, if you decide to go to Greenland to ski, you need to be aware of sea ice and the impacts of sea ice, what's safe to walk on, what can cause an issue if you took a boat to get to a line that, open water. Did the tide just shift a bunch of ice into your landing? That's a fairly common thing that you need to keep in consideration if you're doing a ski trip there. We did a trip to Svalbard this last year, but this is also for Greenland as well. You need to be aware and know how to use a rifle to protect yourself if you run into a polar bear when you're out there. And so I like to tell people, now that I do a little bit of hunting, I like to tell people that I had the weirdest entrance to like learning about guns and stuff. It was because I wanted to go skiing in a place that had polar bears. So, purchased a couple bolt action rifles and just repeated that motion so that, I probably put 500 rounds through to make sure that I had that, if I were to see a polar bear, I knew exactly what I needed to do. This is also from last year. I've had a few bad trips in a row. Flew to Argentina, and this is what we showed up to. Also a pretty poor year. So I remember riding this lift here, texting my two friends that are here. I'm like, I don't know if the resort's going to be open when you get here. I don't know what we're going to ski. You should come. We'll make it fun, but the resort may close. And, so anyways, started thinking about some options to pivot to. And we found these geodesic domes that are right on the border of Chile, Argentina, a little bit of a guide service that we could do a trip with. And we headed there. We found great snow after a couple days storm. We were stuck inside. It's probably snowed a meter and a half of snow. We were stuck inside. We tried to go outside one day and we walked maybe, 150 meters, 500 feet from the yurt, the domes. And it was such bad visibility. There's rocks around on this area over to the right. And we just had to turn around and call it. Like, you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them. We just sat around for a couple days, helped the local staff get ready, saw that there was a break in the weather, and were able to get some good lines in. But what I find to be, like, I guess the more complex part of this is the road that we had to drive up there. On our way up, the guide service that was escorting us is like, hey, you should put your chains on here. and drive up, and you'll be able to park right here, just about. And then when the trip's done, you'll be able to drive down. It's going to be great. And all I can say is that as we put our tire chains on and realized that they didn't fit, that we needed to drive back down. And so we drove our car back down, and they gave us a ride up to where the domes are over here. And we spent that time up there without a car. So when the weather cleared and a friend had a flight out of Mendoza the next day, instead of our car being buried underneath a meter and a half of snow, basically we got lucky by not listening to anything. This is basically the exact opposite of my whole talk. The chains didn't fit, and that was the lucky thing for us. I guess what I'm trying to say is have a little healthy skepticism if you're headed to an area and stuff's not going right. Just have that flexibility to pivot, because that saved us for being able to get out of there on time and get back to Mendoza. Last slide is, let's see, a little bit about Ecuador. When we went skiing in Ecuador, we went and climbed Cayambe volcano here. And then we went and climbed Cotopaxi. And we were getting ready to potentially go to Chimborazo. But unfortunately, there was an avalanche accident on Chimborazo. And, obviously, not obviously, I work for a guide service that has quite a few relationships with Ecuadorians. So I knew a lot of the Ecuadorians down there. We were talking like, hey, are we able to help at all or anything? And as that's going on, this is just post-COVID, Ecuador is a country where if you go to, all the gas across the entire country is the same price. And so whatever, it was $2.50 a gallon. The government decided to jack the prices to $2.80, and just, civil unrest broke out. Highways were blocked. And my friends texted me and said, you need to get back to Quito immediately. There's violence happening out there. And we had to call our trip. We just ended up sitting in Quito, waiting out sort of this domestic issue that they had going on. And so I don't know how all that comes across. You can encounter a lot of different problems when you're doing these adventure trips, I like to call them. But again, like I said before, if you're not aware of what the hazards are you can encounter out there, you're doing yourself a little bit of a disservice. So spend as much time trying to get to learn, if you're trying to do one of those trips, what you might encounter and what gear you should have to be prepared for that in the event something happens. So a few takeaways from this talk are to plan thoroughly before you leave home. Consider the skills of the group to make sure you're not just trying to make that trip happen. You feel like your group is well prepared for the trip. Having a plan A, B, C, D, E, whatever. The more plans you have, the better off, for pivoting if something happens. And then just the safety person in me or whatever, be a risk mitigator. Be looking out for different things that don't make sense, that you didn't anticipate, and take things slow when you show up in a new country trying to go skiing for the first time. Because, there's a lot of things out there that you're going to be unfamiliar with. I guess that's not the last slide. Just a little bit of what's next for me. I'm always trying to think about other things. So I said at the beginning, I skied on 5 of the 7 continents. So for me, I got to ski New Zealand and Africa still. So looking forward to putting those on the calendar, hopefully for next year. And then I've had a few clients reach out to me. I talked briefly about Denali, but back before COVID, I worked a lot as a high altitude guide on Denali, Kilimanjaro, Aconcagua, Kyrgyzstan, and whatever. I'm really looking forward to combining that high altitude experience and I've got a few clients for Cho-OU. So we're looking forward to hopefully doing that in the summer of 2028. But in advance of that, this summer, we are trying hard to put together a climb and ski of Mustagata, which is one of the tallest peaks in China. That's very accessible. It's like a 20, 25 degree slope, just a great place to like, okay, it's been a few years since we were doing a lot of high altitude climbing, get our things together, try Mustagata first before we commit to, a bottled oxygen peak. But unfortunately, the Chinese government's just very difficult to work with right now, and they're not issuing permits. So we'll see how that all plays out. But that's kind of what I've got on tap. I want to thank you all for listening. Hopefully you got a few things out of this talk, and open it up to questions if there are any. Yeah. Go ahead.
Do you have a preferred brand of rescue sled, and what insurance do you roll with?
Good question. Preferred brand for me, I mean, there's function before fashion. There's, let's see, Mark Smiley just came up with a super lightweight one that's like a Tyvek tarp. That's an option. I mean, it depends on what you're using it for, I guess I'd say, but function before fashion is like a pretty popular one nowadays. I mean, you guys help me out. I can't remember. I have a different brand, but there's a little bit more people going towards the function before fashion nowadays. And then as far as rescue insurance, Ripcord is a good one. I did say early in the presentation, I used to book everything on my Chase Sapphire credit card because of, there's like $100,000 in dental coverage and, repatriation. Like it was actually really good coverage, but with them jacking up the prices on that, I'm getting rid of it really soon. And so, yeah, I'll buy trip insurance for trips that are kind of out there where getting back home would be a little bit more complicated, like Greenland or Antarctica. I used Ripcord. Yeah, just be aware of some of the restrictions if you are signing up for travel insurance. You got to be honest with them. Are you climbing above a certain elevation? Are you traveling a latitude that they don't cover? Any of those things can preclude you from getting coverage even though you paid for it. So just be aware of that stuff.
Just plug Jackson Backcountry rescue sleds.
Yeah.
They're 360 grams. And you vacuum seal them, and it just is a really tight package. You can kind of slip in the small on your back.
Yeah. Yeah, in the back.
What's your best way to go about trying to find a guide in some of these international countries if you're not in the loop with guiding and stuff like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's see. I mean, I guess when I show up to areas, like I sometimes just meet them. Like, I mean, India is a good example. Everybody wanted a guy to guide while you were there. I was just able to, meet somebody there and establish a relationship. But I don't know if I have a great answer for you. I guess I would say like reaching out to the local guide community and saying, hey, I'd like to do a trip here. A lot of us are in, the Ogden backcountry skiing community Facebook page. I mean, you can reach out to me and I'm happy to, I'll just pass you along to a local guide that I know that's in the area. There's no kind of catch-all. I have a lot of ideas running through my head as far as websites I could offer that don't make any money. And, but having like a guide, directory or something would be something that's awesome, but not something I'm aware of that exists aside from like right in the United States or in, maybe other certified countries. So like, if you're in the US, you can use AMGA, hire a guide. That's like, you can do a little search there and see what countries people work in, but that's like specific for finding an American that's working there, not necessarily a local guide. So it depends on what you're looking for. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah.
But reach out. If you want to do a trip to any of those places, I'll pass you along to a local guide I know. Yes.
Hi, Phil O'Brien here, great name. Yeah. You seem to be really good at finding last minute cancelable reservations. Are there best resources for that?
Oh man.
Could be a whole lot of talk.
Yeah. That's a good question. I mean, I use hotels.com, last minute cancellations on there. You can search by, is it cancelable or are you locked in immediately? Airbnb. I mean, I would say most of these resources nowadays, you can just search by the refundability of it. And, those are, I mean, VRBO and any of those resources, I think you can search and find refundable options. But what you got to be aware of is like the restrictions on it. So like some lock you in 2 months beforehand. I'm the type of person, I kind of want like the week beforehand or 2 weeks beforehand, something like that. Then I see what weather's coming and I can maybe have that time to pivot. So yeah, just because it's refundable doesn't mean it's refundable up to like, 2 days or 4 days beforehand. So, yes.
I know you were in Antarctica recently. What was that experience?
Oh, that I don't know how to describe it, to be honest. That's a tough question. I mean, Antarctica is just such a special place. Yeah, it's really unique. I mean, I guess I'll give a quick like 1 minute or 2 minutes, whatever, about it. But we took a boat across the Drake Passage from Argentina across to Antarctica. We were able to jump in Zodiacs. And what you can see, I mean, this photo is actually a good example, is there's just not that many landings. And so once you're out there, you're looking for those places that the snow doesn't end in a cliff into the ocean, that you can access the skiing. I mean, it's otherworldly. I can't describe. I think, to be honest, I'm still processing it. It's the type of place where if you talk about with people, not many people have been there, and so it's not that relatable for people. I don't know if that makes sense, and so I think I'm still like internalizing it a little bit. It was a really cool opportunity, and I look forward to hopefully going back next year, in November. Any other? Oh, way in the back.
I mean, I think you have to consider every trip.
Like as I'm preparing a trip, I guess doing it like they're not all guided trips. Like I like doing personal trips for sure, but I guess I just start out with thinking about the budgetary side of things. What's going to be required on my trip? Like, okay, so it's like, I don't know if and stop me if I'm not directly answering your question, but like, okay, so there's the airfare, then there's the baggage fees, then there's, the taxi ride or, to a location or getting my rental car. I just have that, like, I guess I do have a spreadsheet. I'm just working through the budgetary side of things to, have that all sorted out. So I know what to charge people or what it's going to cost me personally or us. Yeah. And then I guess I do have my own, gear lists that live on my computer. So if I'm going to a glaciated area, I know I need this sort of gear. If I'm going to do a traverse, and with camping, I can bring that or pull up that gear list and start packing. I mean, a lot of these trips, again, they're so nuanced. They're kind of starting from scratch each time to a certain degree, but there also is, I guess, yeah, thinking about it budgetarily has helped me just make sure that I'm not forgetting anything and just work through that process of booking. So I don't know if that quite answers your question, but okay. Follow-up question or okay. We can talk after too. Yeah.
I'm finding more and more, I've always struggled with satellite phone for new reach, and more people are relying on cell phones that now have satellite services.
Yeah.
And foregoing the inReach, especially locally in North America. What is your experience with that? Do you think it's worth it to give up the inReach?
I was in the exact same boat. I thought, the iPhone or whatever phone you're with is going to be the catch-all. And when they offered that starting whatever it was, maybe a year and a half ago, I thought that was going to progress. But what I found is, this year, or excuse me, in 2025 alone, none of the countries I traveled to, Argentina, Chile, Norway, Svalbard, that was a thing that was a capability. That's not a thing there yet. So your phone that may work doing that here doesn't necessarily work. And I expect, like any technology, that's probably going to rapidly change. But I deactivated my inReach because I thought that was going to be the thing. And I immediately reactivated it. And now I have it all the time because it hasn't progressed to that point quite yet. Okay. All right. Thanks.